Samsung, proud sponsor of Tech Busters.
Welcome back. This is Tech Busters. EMC Corporation recently released results of its 7th digital universe study, the only study to quantify and forecast annual global data production. Now, it's very complicated, and the study looks at how the new tech trends have catapulted the global volume of data. So Aki sat down with EMC's country manager, Servaas, to find out more. Let's take a look at that.
Servaas, thank you for joining us on Tech Busters. The EMC Digital Universe study is always interesting. I think this is the 7th one that you've introduced.
Correct.
And it's quite amazing to see how the data trends and how big data has become as an influence. So what are the key points that have come out of the recent Digital Universe study, Servaas?
Aki, from my perspective, first of all, thanks. Pleasure to be on your show, as always. One of the interesting things for me was the fact that emerging market growth, data growth, is faster than the other markets, which is very interesting. Obviously, South Africa and Southern Africa being an emerging market. The rise of machine data is another interesting aspect of the study as well.
So when you say emerging market growth as being bigger than the actual developed markets,
Yes.
What do you mean? What is attributing to this growth?
I believe it's related to the fact that from a technology aspect, Africa is actually leapfrogging a lot of the existing technologies in the rest of the world. We see that phenomenon in the mobile telco market as an example, where the emerging markets actually leverage current technology as opposed to legacy technology.
So that's quite interesting. So you're saying that these emerging markets like South Africa, for example, we're creating data faster than the developed markets, just
Yes.
simply because we've leapfrogged everybody.
Yes.
That is actually quite fascinating. But you talk about data, and I'm looking at some of the stats. You're talking about how many iPads you're going to stack up to try and work out how much data. And it's just mind-boggling numbers. Can you give us some of those numbers? Put them into perspective for us.
I would say the most interesting one for me is the fact that a newborn child today will have more data created by that person and about that person than all the data that exists in the world today.
It's quite crazy
About
stuff.
everything, yeah.
So, Servaas, I mean, we're living in this digital universe where we've got so much of this data that we're creating. Do we have enough time to store it? Not enough time, but is there enough place to store this data? Because surely when you look at what's coming and you look at the connected devices, which we'll talk about in a second, but do we have enough space to store this quickly enough?
No, the research is definitely showing that the available data space to store it is not growing at the same pace as the creation of data is growing. That's offset by the fact that a lot of data is what they call transient in nature. Does not need it to be stored anywhere, or needed to be stored for a very small period of time. So it's very interesting how this is unfolding. And beneath the study, what EMC is looking at is deduplication and compression technologies within data to leverage technology to solve that problem.
But at the same time, this data is all going to be put to good use, because I mean, if we start crunching the numbers and put it to good use, but the number that really scares me is, I mean, we've got what, 6 or so billion devices connected at the moment.
Yep.
You like talking, I mean, IDC, EMC is talking about 32 billion devices
Yes.
by 2020, which is not far from now. And what kind of devices and what kind of scenario is that looking like?
An example of that, Aki, would be what's happening in the aircraft industry. Instead of selling an aircraft engine with a planned maintenance plan, what the industry is looking at is to actually use technology to gather data about that particular motor and then replace parts on an on-demand basis. Now that is an example of sensors and machines creating data on behalf, to change the model, the business model of that particular industry.
The other impact of this, of course, it's great for big business and the cloud. And are you seeing an interesting move to the cloud by big business, by consumers alike? And how do you differentiate the way consumers and enterprise use data?
Yes, that's an interesting point. Most of the data, funny enough, in the digital universe today is created by the consumer, yet it has to be stored and protected by the enterprise. So that's a very interesting thing, and this is why the CIO market is very attentively looking at this problem and how to solve it as well.
Servaas, there's a lot of debate around the POPI Act, which I'm sure
Yes.
you've basically been following as well, but it's going to have a huge impact on how we store data and what kind of data we share. How does the POPI Act and how will the POPI Act affect businesses like EMC and local businesses who store data in the cloud?
It affects us from two perspectives. We obviously have a security division, which is related to the POPI Act, but I'll use the example that you used in terms of the automotive industry. Does the car manufacturer have the right to broadcast the information he's collected about you? And the people that collect the information from the car or the car company, what do they do with that information? That's where the POPI Act and similar acts around the world is going to come into play in terms of, yes, the data is there and it's created, but what is legally allowed to be done with that data.
Servaas Venter, EMC's country manager, thank you for joining us on Tech Busters.
Thank you, Aki.